I thought I told you to get on down the hill.
Thought you might need this. Think you got a corner on all this real estate?
He was the most decorated American soldier of World War II, a boy from Texas who rose from poverty to the heights of glory, then stepped into Hollywood to become a star.
Where are the rest of your men?
Well, they're dead.
On screen, his smile lit up theaters. On the battlefield, his bravery made history. But away from the spotlight, Audie Murphy lived a different story written in scars and shadows that never left him. The medals shined, but the man behind them was haunted. His fame couldn't erase the nightmares. His charm couldn't mend the cracks in his closest relationships. And the question that lingers is chilling. Behind the legend of America's hero, what kind of man was Audie Murphy at home? The answer may not be what you expect. Early struggles and rise to fame. Audie Murphy is remembered as the ultimate American hero, the poor kid from Texas who became the most decorated U.S. soldier of World War II and, later, a Hollywood star. But most people never realized that behind the glory and the medals, his life was marked by struggles. Audie Leon Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, as the seventh of 12 children in a family that never had enough. His father drifted from job to job, sometimes disappearing for long stretches of time, while his mother, Josie Bell, worked tirelessly to keep her children alive. Life was unrelenting, and Audie's earliest memories were shaped by hunger and poverty. School was a luxury he could not afford. By the 5th grade, Audie had dropped out. His days were consumed by taking on menial jobs just to survive. To make matters worse, Audie's father abandoned the family permanently when he was barely 11. And his mother's already fragile health worsened with every passing year. The family's survival depended largely on Audie. He went into small hunting just to put food on the table. And he took odd jobs wherever he could find them, doing the work of grown men, though he was still a child. In 1941, when Audie was 16, tragedy struck again. His mother died, leaving the Murphy children with no anchor. Many of his younger siblings were sent to orphanages, and for Audie, who had already taken on the role of protector, the loss was crushing. It was around this time that war began reshaping the world. And once the United States got fully involved, Audie saw the military as a path forward. However, there was a problem. He was small, weighed barely 110 pounds, and looked younger than his age. The Navy rejected him. The Marines turned him away. And so, determined not to be left behind, he altered his records to show he was 18 instead of 17. And in 1942, the Army finally accepted him. When he shipped out, he carried little more than determination. He first saw combat in July 1943, during the Allied invasion of Sicily. The boy who had once hunted rabbits in Texas was suddenly thrust into battlefields filled with chaos and fire. He fought in Anzio, Rome, and southern France, where his bravery became evident early on. Audie never backed down, even when the odds were stacked against them. But the moment that defined his legacy came in January 1945, during the Battle of the Colmar Pocket in eastern France. Audie's unit was under relentless attack by German forces. At one point, a company of enemy soldiers and tanks bore down on them. Wounded and outnumbered, Audie single-handedly held off the German advance for nearly an hour. He repelled wave after wave of attackers, and witnesses later said it was as if he had become a one-man army. When reinforcements finally arrived, he refused to leave until his men were safe. He had been injured in the leg, but stayed in place until the enemy retreated. That act of near-superhuman courage earned him the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award. But it was only one of many. By the end of the war, Audie Murphy had received every U.S. combat award for valor, along with decorations from France and Belgium. In total, he had been wounded 3 times and credited with conquering hundreds of enemy soldiers, at just 20 years old. His face soon became familiar across the United States. In 1945, Life magazine put him on its cover, presenting him as the very embodiment of courage. For a country weary from years of war, he was the perfect symbol of sacrifice and victory. Yet, even then, his reality was more complex than the headlines suggested. In the years that followed, Audie turned his experiences into words. In 1949, he published his memoir, To Hell and Back, a raw account of his time in combat. The book struck a chord with readers because it did not romanticize war. It laid bare the fear, the violence, and the cost paid by soldiers. 6 years later, Hollywood adapted the book into a film. Audie played himself, reliving scenes that many veterans struggled to forget. The movie became Universal's highest-grossing release until 1975, cementing his place in both military and cinematic history. From there, he built a career in Hollywood. He appeared in multiple films, most of them westerns. Audiences loved him as the quiet, tough hero who could outdraw an outlaw or defend the innocent, and he soon became a household name across America. Yet, as his fame grew, so did the gap between the man on screen and the man in private. His rise from the fields of Texas to the battlefields of Europe and finally to the bright lights of Hollywood was extraordinary. But it had come at a cost. The scars of war remained with him, shaping every decision he made in the years ahead. While the world saw a decorated hero and a movie star, those closest to him began to see the shadows he carried. What he had endured on the battlefield remained with him, and the struggle to live with those memories would define the rest of his life. The struggles after the war. When the war ended, America saw Audie Murphy as a legend. He was the young soldier who had stared death in the face and refused to back down. However, when he returned home, the real battle was only beginning. This time, it wasn't fought on the battlefields of Europe anymore, but inside his own mind. Today we call it post-traumatic stress disorder, but in the 1940s and 50s, it had a very different name: battle fatigue. At the time, it was barely understood, and few people spoke about it openly. For Audie Murphy, it was the invisible wound that no medal could heal. Friends and family noticed it almost immediately. He was restless, easily startled, and constantly on edge. At night, he rarely found peace. He suffered from recurring nightmares that pulled him back into the chaos of combat. In those dreams, the enemy soldiers he had fought against returned, not with faces, but as faceless figures chasing him endlessly. He once described being haunted by these men, a ghostly reminder of the war he could not leave behind. Sleep became a torment, and Murphy resorted to extreme measures. He kept a firearm under his pillow every night to help his paranoia. The war had trained him never to let his guard down, and even in the safety of his own home, he felt surrounded by threats that no one else could see. The toll this took on his mind and body was crushing. To cope, he turned to sleeping medication, first in small amounts, then in increasing doses. And then he developed a dependency that nearly consumed him. At one point, recognizing how deep the problem had become, he locked himself in a hotel room for a week to break free from the addiction and regain control. But his struggles were not limited to the battlefield in his mind. Despite his fame and success in Hollywood, Murphy's finances were unstable. The image of a decorated war hero and movie star suggested wealth and security. Yet behind closed doors, he was constantly battling money problems. Part of this problem came from his generosity. He supported family members and gave freely to others, often without thinking about the consequences. But another part was his own missteps. He lost large sums of money through failed investments and gambling. The westerns he starred in brought him recognition, but they didn't always pay enough to secure his future. By the late 1960s, the financial pressure caught up with him, and he was forced to declare bankruptcy. Even his home life reflected the chaos in his mind. At one point, Murphy converted his garage into a bedroom. To anyone else, it might have seemed odd, but for him, it was about escaping the noise and finding a place where he could feel safe. The walls of that garage became a kind of fortress against a world that felt unpredictable and threatening. Multiple insider reports described Audie as a haunted man. On the outside, he was disciplined, polite, and even charming when he wanted to be. But there was always a distance, a heaviness in his eyes that revealed the weight he carried. The boy who had fought his way out of poverty and into the history books was never free from the ghosts that followed him. Despite his inner turmoil, Murphy did try to speak up for others like him. At a time when most veterans were expected to stay silent, he openly admitted his struggles with what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. He even urged the government to increase support for returning soldiers, warning that many were suffering in silence. In doing so, he became one of the first public figures to break through the stigma and acknowledge the hidden wounds of war. But courage on the battlefield did not always translate to peace at home. The war had left permanent scars, and they colored everything in his life, from his relationships to his career to his sense of identity. The world celebrated him as a symbol of victory, but inside he felt trapped in battles that never ended. And as those battles raged on, they began to take a toll not only on him, but also on the people closest to him. Because behind the decorated soldier and the Hollywood star, there was also a husband, a father, and a man who longed for stability, but often found heartbreak instead. Marriage and heartbreak. By the late 1940s, Audie Murphy was not only a decorated war hero, but also a public figure whose face was instantly recognizable across America. Hollywood had embraced him, and his memoir, To Hell and Back, was already shaping his reputation beyond the battlefield. But in 1949, he took another step that drew public attention when he married actress Wanda Hendricks. At first, their union was seen as a glamorous match. Hendricks was a rising star in Hollywood, admired for her talent and beauty, while Murphy carried the aura of a real-life hero. To the outside world, it looked like a perfect pairing, but behind closed doors, their marriage was filled with tension almost from the start. Hendricks would open up about what those years were like. She revealed that Murphy's war experiences followed him into their home. He was restless, quick to anger, and prone to disturbing nightmares. At times, he carried the battlefield into their arguments. She recalled that on more than one occasion, he behaved inappropriately in fits of paranoia and fear. Their marriage lasted only 2 years, and in 1951, they divorced. For Hendricks, the experience left lasting effects. The public scrutiny that surrounded her relationship with Murphy cast a shadow over her career, and she struggled to recover professionally. But for Murphy, the divorce was another painful chapter in a life that was already marked by personal battles. Surprisingly, only 4 days after finalizing his divorce from Hendricks, Murphy remarried, this time to Pamela Archer, an airline hostess supervisor who preferred a quieter, more private existence. Their marriage began in April 1951, and for a time it offered Murphy the stability he had long been seeking. With Pamela, he started a family. They had 2 sons, Terrence Michael Murphy and James Shannon Murphy. Pamela provided a calming presence, balancing Murphy's restless nature with patience and steadiness. She was devoted to him even during the most difficult years, standing by him through financial troubles, health challenges, and the lingering effects of his wartime trauma. Yet even this marriage was not without strain. Murphy's post-war struggles followed him everywhere. His ongoing battle with insomnia, nightmares, and financial stress put pressure on the relationship. Despite his love for his family, there were periods of distance when his inner turmoil created a barrier between him and the people closest to him. There were also whispers in Hollywood about Murphy's brief romantic flings during the height of his career. Among the names linked to him was actress Peggy Castle, known for her appearances in westerns. Though such rumors were never fully confirmed, they circulated in the press and added another layer of complexity to the public's image of him. Still, Pamela remained his anchor. While their marriage was far from easy, she did not walk away, and her loyalty kept Murphy grounded during times when his personal and professional life seemed to be unraveling. She accepted the challenges that came with being married to a man who carried both extraordinary accomplishments and heavy burdens. By the 1960s, Murphy's marriage was one of the few constants in his life. Hollywood success came and went. Financial troubles mounted, and his health declined under the strain of PTSD and the physical injuries he had sustained in combat. Pamela and their 2 sons provided the family structure he had missed since childhood. In public, Murphy was often seen as stoic, disciplined, and composed. In private, however, his relationships revealed the depth of the struggles he endured. He was capable of deep affection, but the scars of war made intimacy difficult. He wanted peace, but he often lived in chaos. And those personal battles soon spilled into the public sphere. Because beyond his marriages and family life, Murphy's later years were marked by controversies that followed him everywhere he went. Controversies that haunted Audie. For much of his life, Audie Murphy was celebrated as a symbol of courage and honor. Yet, as the years went on, his name occasionally appeared in headlines for reasons far different from his battlefield heroics or his Hollywood career. Several controversies surrounded him in his later years, and though he often managed to move past them, they left marks on his reputation and added to the weight he already carried. One of the most notable incidents came in 1970. Murphy was arrested in Los Angeles and charged with battery with intent to commit murder. The case stemmed from an altercation with a dog trainer named David Goffstein. According to reports, a dispute escalated into a backyard brawl. During the confrontation, Murphy allegedly fired a shot, and he was accused of striking Goffstein as well. The arrest made national news. The idea that America's most decorated soldier could be involved in such a violent incident shocked many. Murphy, however, maintained his innocence from the beginning. He pleaded not guilty, insisting that he had acted in self-defense. As the case unfolded, the details became murkier, with conflicting accounts of what had actually taken place that day. In the end, the court cleared him of all charges, and the case was dismissed. Still, the episode left a blemish on his otherwise heroic public image. Financial troubles also fueled controversy throughout Murphy's post-war years. Despite his fame, he struggled to maintain stability with money. One of his most significant losses came through an investment in an Algerian oil deal. Murphy believed the venture had the potential to bring major returns, but it collapsed, costing him an estimated $260,000, a devastating blow, especially at a time when he was already facing mounting financial pressure. On top of that, the Internal Revenue Service pursued him over unpaid taxes. The situation placed him under even more strain, adding legal and financial battles to the personal struggles he was already enduring. Bankruptcy loomed over him, and at times it seemed that the man once seen as untouchable was being weighed down by challenges from every direction. Yet, even while he faced accusations and financial ruin, Murphy demonstrated a strong sense of principle in other areas of his life. Hollywood and the advertising industry often looked to him as an ideal spokesman. Offers came in from companies eager to attach his name to their products, especially alcohol and cigarettes, which were commonly endorsed by celebrities at the time. Murphy refused them all. He believed that promoting such products would set a poor example for young people who looked up to him. His refusal to commercialize himself in that way set him apart from many of his contemporaries. But it also meant turning down large sums of money that could have eased his financial burden. But for Murphy, the idea of associating his name with products that could harm others was something he could not accept. It was a reminder that even amid controversy, he remained committed to a personal code of conduct that had guided him since his earliest years in uniform. Despite everything, he continued to work, continued to support his family, and continued to carry himself with the discipline of a soldier. Yet by the early 1970s, his life was moving toward its final chapter, and when the end came, it was sudden, tragic, and deeply mourned across the nation. The final flight. On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy's remarkable life came to an abrupt and tragic end. That morning, he boarded a twin-engine Aero Commander 680 super aircraft on a business trip. The plane was headed toward Martinsville, Virginia, but it never reached its destination. Somewhere near Brush Mountain, close to Catawba, Virginia, the flight encountered worsening weather conditions. Reports noted heavy fog, steady rain, and poor visibility across the Blue Ridge Mountains. Flying in such weather was challenging even for experienced pilots, and as the plane approached the mountainous terrain, it descended into the mist and disappeared, crashing moments later. Everyone on board, including Murphy and several business associates, along with the pilot, all passed away. The wreckage was later discovered on the mountainside, a grim reminder of how suddenly life could end, even for a man who had survived some of the most brutal battlefields of World War II. News of Murphy's death spread quickly across the country. The announcement came as a shock to millions of Americans. He was only 45 years old, still young, still active, and still known as the symbol of courage and resilience. Newspapers and television stations reported the crash in somber detail, and tributes began pouring in almost immediately. 4 days later, Murphy was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. The ceremony drew large crowds, including fellow veterans, military officials, and ordinary citizens who had long admired him. His coffin was draped with the American flag, and a firing squad delivered the traditional 3-volley salute. As taps played, it marked the close of a chapter in American history. Murphy's grave quickly became one of the most visited in Arlington. Over the years, millions of people have walked past the simple white headstone that bears his name. For many, it represents not only his personal heroism, but also the sacrifices of an entire generation of soldiers. The steady stream of visitors has placed his resting place among the cemetery's most honored and remembered sites. In the years following his death, questions arose about the flight and the conditions that led to the crash. Investigations highlighted the poor weather as a key factor. However, in 1975, a federal court awarded Murphy's widow, Pamela, and their 2 sons, Terrence and James, $2.5 million in damages. The judgment was against the aircraft's manufacturer and others involved in the chain of responsibility for the fatal flight. While the award could never replace the man they had lost, it stood as recognition of the circumstances that had taken his life. Murphy's death left a profound void. His passing marked the end of a story that had captured the imagination of the American public for decades. A story that began in the cotton fields of Texas, passed through the fire of World War II, and rose to the heights of Hollywood fame. Yet, his legacy endured. His military record remained unmatched. His films continued to be broadcast, and his memoir, To Hell and Back, was still read by those seeking to understand the cost of war. For his family, however, the loss was deeply personal. Pamela had stood by him through years of hardship, and his sons had grown up in the shadow of both his achievements and his struggles. To them, he was not only a decorated soldier or a movie star, but a father whose presence could never be replaced. And in the years after his death, his son would reflect openly on who his father truly was behind all the medals, what it meant to carry his father's legacy, and the heartbreak of knowing the private pain that Hero had lived with every day. Terrence Murphy's heartbreaking reflections. Terrence Michael Murphy, born in 1952, grew up in the long shadow of one of America's most decorated heroes. From an early age, he knew his father was admired across the nation, yet the man who came home at night was very different from the public figure celebrated in films, magazines, and military ceremonies. While Audie Murphy belonged to history, to the military, and to Hollywood, Terrence's memories were shaped by the quieter, more complicated figure of a father scarred by experiences most could not imagine. Unlike his father, Terrence chose a quiet life. He did not pursue Hollywood fame or a military career. Instead, he carried himself away from the spotlight, a decision that reflected both the weight of his father's reputation and his own search for a more ordinary existence. Yet, despite his preference for privacy, Terrence took on an important role in keeping his father's legacy alive. He became one of the few voices willing to speak honestly about the reality behind Audie Murphy's public image. In his reflections, Terrence often acknowledged the immense pride he felt in his father's bravery. He understood that Audie's accomplishments in World War II were unparalleled, that his battlefield courage had saved lives, and that his service stood as an enduring example of sacrifice. But alongside that pride came a recognition of the toll it took. Terrence did not romanticize the cost of his father's heroism. He described Audie as a man who was both strong and deeply wounded, a father who lived with memories that never released their grip. Growing up, Terrence saw firsthand how the war lingered in his father's daily life. The sleepless nights, the restlessness, and the ever-present edge in his demeanor all left impressions on the family. While the public admired a war hero and screen star, the Murphy household experienced the struggles that came with trauma. Terrence carried the awareness that his father's inner battles shaped the atmosphere at home, affecting relationships and family routines in ways that outsiders could never see. In later years, Terrence helped ensure that his father's story was remembered in its full complexity. Through literary work and public remembrance efforts, he contributed to keeping Audie's legacy alive, not as a flawless figure, but as a human being who bore both greatness and pain. He played a part in preserving museum exhibits, historical records, and educational programs that highlighted not only the medals and achievements, but also the personal cost of combat. In his reflections, Terrence emphasized that the silence surrounding his father's trauma was one of the most difficult burdens. At the time, very few spoke openly about what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Veterans were expected to return home, resume their lives, and carry their memories quietly. For Audie Murphy, that silence became a heavy weight. Terrence observed that being a national symbol left little room for vulnerability. His father was praised for his heroism, but rarely given the space to express his suffering. Terrence also acknowledged the challenges of being the son of such a widely admired man. The name Murphy carried enormous respect, but it also carried expectations. Everywhere he went, people recognized him through the lens of his father's reputation. While that recognition was a source of pride, it also meant that Terrence lived with constant comparisons. He inherited not only a legacy of honor, but also the unspoken responsibility of representing it. Despite these challenges, Terrence dedicated himself to making sure the world remembered Audie Murphy with accuracy and depth. He understood that his father's story could inspire future generations, but he wanted it told honestly, not as a legend detached from reality, but as the journey of a man who achieved extraordinary feats and then struggled to live with their aftermath. Through his work and his reflections, Terrence painted a portrait of his father that balanced admiration with truth. He reminded the world that behind the medals and films stood a man who had endured more than most could bear, and that the cost of war extended far beyond the battlefield. For Terrence, preserving his father's memory was not about defending a flawless image. It was about honoring the reality of a life that combined bravery with brokenness and triumph with struggle. In many ways, Terrence's reflections are the most human part of the Audie Murphy story. They revealed what the headlines never captured: the cost to family, the weight of silence, and the burden of living in the shadow of a national icon. Through him, we gain an understanding that heroism is not free of pain, and that even those who achieve greatness pay a price that their loved ones quietly share. What do you remember about Audie Murphy? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe.